Welcome to the Clear Path Pod, episode 70. Today, we're covering the Warriors and their struggles in the last few games. They're 2-3. They've had some rough performances, especially on the defensive end. They've struggled to contain the Cavs. They've struggled to contain even teams that they've beat, like the Thunder. And we're going to talk today about the struggles. We're also going to talk about what's working for them, some players that we want to perform better, and then project their next 5. So let's start out with the Warriors' defensive troubles.
Absolutely.
In the last few games, the Warriors have looked not quite so hot on the defensive end compared to their hot start. Of course, it's only 10 games in. I wouldn't be pressing the panic button on the season anything.
6-4
but
still.
Being 2-3 in their last 5, having some questionable defensive performances, a few things have stood out to me. The first thing that I want to talk about is the Warriors struggling containing drives. We've seen players like Josh Giddey, like Karis LeVert, Cade Cunningham, all having a really easy time getting into the lane, scoring against the Warriors, having consecutive possessions of just scoring. These scoring bursts, the Warriors are having a lot of trouble stopping that penetration. What do you think is going on here? Why are the Warriors having so much trouble with some of these larger players, and why are they giving up so many points?
Yeah, I think it's kind of referring back to kind of our video that we published recently, kind of with film review, when we're looking at like the passing and stuff like that. We'll have a video next week, kind of talking a little bit about defense. And I think when you really look at the Warriors on the defensive end, they have an issue with just personnel. I feel like they only really have 2 people, I feel like, that can guard those bigger wings, which is Kuminga and Andrew Wiggins. And without those 2, it's a little bit
And
tougher.
Dre.
Yeah, and Draymond, but Draymond, they usually reserve for the big man or somebody like that. So whenever the point guard, because a lot of these guys you talked about were point guards or shooting guards, when they have the ball, it's tough to put Draymond on them. So they end up putting Wiggins or Kuminga, but then sometimes Clay inevitably gets switched on them. Sometimes Steph's on them. And it makes it really tough for the Warriors to actually defend these players. And a lot of times they're great passers as well. So there's multiple things that they do. And I mean, honestly, if we're going to look at it, the Warriors have had a tough time with this in the past. They've always had really tough time with players like this. I mean, specifically, the Warriors like to use either they use a zone, which they probably use maybe 20 to 30% of the time or less. And then they like to essentially they play like a no middle defense. So they try to keep people out of the middle. But somehow that doesn't always work. I mean, it's the NBA. So yeah, that the coverage doesn't always work. And that makes it tough for them to contain a ball handler.
Yeah. When the Warriors ice or blue, they're essentially going parallel to these wing pick and rolls, trying to force the ball handler to go to the sides to basically use the baseline as another defender, in order to make it more difficult for that ball handler to get the ball inside, to make a pass, to score, forcing him to kick it back and reset. The Warriors are still having trouble, most notably with point of attack. We saw last year, whenever they played the Kings, that the Kings, throughout the first few games, had basically, a field day getting past the Warriors' point of attack, getting easy buckets inside the lane. And we've seen that happen again to the Warriors this year, especially with the larger ball handlers. Giddey is 6'7", 6'8", or something like that. When you have these very tall downhill ball handlers, the Warriors have had trouble this year containing them. That's come in the form of Wiggins not looking as hot, containing those guys, especially on the wings. And then on top of that, a lot of defensive mistakes, despite having pretty good personnel on ball, in passing lanes like Gary Payton, like Moses Moody. The way the Warriors play defense, there's a lot of rotations, and then those rotations have to go right. We saw last night against Cleveland, the Warriors struggled to not only contain Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland, but they also struggled to deal with the penetration that those 2 guards provided, and then the kickouts that would come from that dribble penetration. And this weak point of attack defense and getting lost in rotation is going to hurt the Warriors this year, and it's
Yeah,
going to hurt
absolutely.
the most against teams that have these forceful, interior guards. I would expect today for the Warriors to have trouble against Anthony Edwards, who,
Yeah.
is maybe framed similarly to Cade, but is a more elite or more developed scorer at
Yeah.
this point
Maybe, yeah,
in his career.
for sure.
And that to me has been probably the number one defensive problem for the Warriors this year. Has there been anything else you've noticed throughout the past few games?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head right there. And I think honestly, to be quite honest with you as a Warriors fan, when you watch them year over year over year, this has been the problem with them as of recently, even as recent as, honestly, the NBA Finals versus the Celtics. They had this problem that year as well, when the games they would lose oftentimes would be two teams that would do this, where they would have essentially a big guard that plays the one or the two that's really dominant and can get to the rim, and they struggle defending that guy. Um, the thing that makes the Warriors better, though, is the fact that they put forth a lot of effort, and that effort kind of can overcome some of that. But in the regular season, I think this is very expected. I think you expected it as well, where there'll be a stretch of games where the Warriors can't defend, because just looking at it, just to put a little stats to it, the Warriors were top 5, I think, in the NBA in defensive rating over the first like 5 or 6 games, and then after went 2-2 last week. Now they're down like closer to 11 to 12. So it's clear that like sometimes effort, I feel like, makes a difference here as well.
Yeah, effort's been a huge part of it. A lot of the reason the bench unit has been looking so good, or just any secondary unit, doesn't
Yeah.
have to be the main bench unit, is that when they come out on the floor, there are just some spurts of like 5 minutes where they put a ton of effort in and they get a lot of stops. We saw them do that yesterday against Cleveland.
Yeah.
The advantage of having like Moody, JK, relatively active GP2, active on ball guys, stronger people that are harder to score on in the wings. Although they don't always show like the necessary discipline, but they still are high effort guys that I think in the right moments can still string together stops. And I think that's what's keeping the Warriors more afloat this year relative to last year, is that they're not getting destroyed in the defensive minutes whenever the second unit's on the floor.
Yeah.
But the starting five's not looking as good defensively this year. And, the Warriors' strength to me on defense is anchored by Draymond's, jack of all trades, switchability, ability to guard out of position, ability to close out effectively, basically plugs any leak. The issue is that if we're not containing drivers, if we're unable to stop dribble penetration, if we have weak point of attack defense, then the Warriors get sent in rotation, players get lost, people get beat on screens, and what happens is that there's no player in the NBA virtually that can make up for those mistakes. And I think that's what's been happening to the Warriors this year.
Yeah, and I know this isn't something we planned necessarily on talking about, but the effort that I talked about is also tied to a lot of times the games we played. The early part of the season, we had obviously everyone's hyped, but we had a big stretch of playing a lot of games very close together. This last Cavs game that we did lose, we had the most rest we've ever had for that game. And so I think a lot of this could be just recovering and tired legs. So we could see a better Warriors team, but definitely there's defensive troubles versus these people we were talking about. But I think overall effort is my key for the Warriors to kind of overcoming this. Cause as we'll highlight later in the week, Moody and GP2 have been playing really well on defense.
Yeah. I think this year the Warriors have definitely displayed the defensive personnel to be okay. It's just that they've gotten a pretty bad slate of matchups. We'll talk about it at the end, but their next 5 is T-Wolves, Thunder. Both of those are teams with the exact type of player that I talked about at the top. Larger guards, larger ball handlers that can score in the interior that the Warriors can't contain as easily. Um, Clay is not as stout. Wiggins hasn't shown the aggressiveness, especially on the defensive end, but also on both ends of the floor, and that's making them weaker there.
Yeah.
But speaking of Wiggins, let's move on to talk about what's going on. So Andrew Wiggins
Boy, Wiggins.
missed a whole lot of games last year due to personal reasons that I don't believe were ever made clear, which is fine. Didn't have a great playoff performance, but the Warriors, I don't think
They didn't play well in the playoffs.
like the
also.
Warriors didn't play well in general. But to start the year this year, Wiggins is still on a slump. Just to outline some of the stats, especially on the 3-point shooting, he's a career 35% 3-point shooter. In the last 3 seasons as a Warrior, he shot basically 38 to 39% on reasonable attempts the last 3 seasons. This year, though, Wiggins, 16.7% from 3 in 10 games. Not only that, he's also not as aggressive. Wiggins is clearly lacking some sort of physical aggressiveness, especially the shots that we would rely on Wiggins to hit, or at least take back in 2022. They're not falling. I'm talking about things like the fadeaway 2, the post-ups, the pop,
Yeah.
all of those shots that, like, a lot of the time we'll try and get Wiggins these isolation matchups. Yesterday, we tried to get Wiggins a few on Darius Garland, but he wasn't converting. So I think it's kind of hard to assess what the problem is because, maybe he is just in a shooting slump or something. What do you think is going on with Wiggins, and how do you think it will affect the Warriors if it continues for, let's say, 20 more
I think
games?
this is probably the biggest part of the Warriors, like, just because I know this is now like a very said point, but Andrew Wiggins was the second best player on the championship team the Warriors had because of his ability to be extremely versatile and be a floor spacer while also being a guy who can create for himself. And right now, he's not able to do any of those, and that presents a huge problem. You outlined the numbers in great detail. The poor 3-point shooting percentage really worries me because the Warriors do have a lot of, like, they have people who specialize in certain things. They have people who specialize in offense and specialize in defense. And Andrew Wiggins is kind of like our Swiss Army knife where he can do everything in all of the lineups. He actually averaged, I think, more minutes than Curry in the finals that year as well, just showing how important he is on both the defensive and offensive end. So I think he's kind of our guy to look forward to if he doesn't improve, the Warriors are in trouble.
Yeah, I mean, he can't be a non-threat from 3. If
No.
Wiggins continues to provide 0 floor spacing, then the Warriors are in a lot of trouble because in the starting 5, they're already running out Dre, who, Dre's actually hit some 3s this year, which is nice to see, but
Yeah.
he's still not that much of a floor spacer, and he doesn't really provide help in that way. And Kevon Looney is obviously a non-threat.
No.
So essentially what you're
Yeah.
running out there is you're running out 2 very good 3-point shooters. But the problem is, especially with the way defenses cover the Warriors, and especially as those shooting slumps continue, the Warriors are going to have a lot of spacing issues. The Warriors rely a lot on, for example, 4-on-3s if they double Curry on a ball screen and Draymond's on that short roll trying to convert.
Yeah.
If Andrew Wiggins was on it, in the past, Wiggins might space out to that left corner or that left wing and hit a 3. This year, he's not opting for that. He's opting to collapse, go get to the basket instead. The problem is he's not really converting on that either. So if Wiggins is not converting on anything, if none of his shots are looking good, then the Warriors are in a lot of trouble. Statistically, is Wiggins going to shoot 17% from 3 this year? Probably not. But keep in mind, in the playoffs last year, he shot 27% from 3 in the Kings series and I believe 33% against the Lakers. So this could be like an actual just shooting decline, right? That's not out of the question.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It feels like he should be at least above 30, but I guess we'll see. I mean, it's really tough with Wiggins too because he is so important to what the Warriors do in kind of a weird way. And a big thing is also like kind of taking the load off of Steph, and making it easier for Steph to not just be the highest scorer on the team every game. The only reason we've honestly been good with Wiggins being so poor is just because our bench has been so good. Um, and that's what I feel like has been really carrying us this season.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's just been a general lack of aggressiveness. Wiggins is a big guy. He's a big
Yeah.
wing. Maybe he's lost some of that physicality. Maybe he didn't have
It's been
the
a long
best
time
season.
too since he's really played. Like you think last year he took so many games off, came back for like 12 games, and then took a whole summer off. So maybe it's just a little rust. And I think you hit it right there. Talking about his aggressiveness, I think part of his aggressiveness might just be he sees his shot not going in. He sees himself getting the ball and turning the ball over. He's in like the bottom 10 percentile of turnover percentage, and he's definitely had a couple bad turnovers, specifically when he does ISO against maybe like a smaller player where you think he should win. Sometimes he's not able to win that matchup, and I feel like his confidence just gets lower and lower and lower off that.
Yeah, no, he just had the play style that the Warriors benefit from Andrew Wiggins hasn't been seen this year at all. I think one bright thing that Steve Kerr also mentioned was from the Warriors analytics team was that there's a greater focus on offensive rebounds, and the Warriors starting five is top 5% in the NBA in getting offensive rebound percentage.
Yeah.
They're getting 38% of their misses. And I think that's really solid. And I have seen Wiggins definitely hone in on those.
Yeah.
So I think that's a valuable part. And, Wiggins, as I said, tall, long, physical, athletic guy. So we need that, because that is converting in terms of offensive rebounds. The Warriors are going to need that in more areas than just offensive rebounds. If Wiggins continues to play at this level, we've already seen the first few games, he wasn't even getting play time in the fourth quarter, right? Like Kuminga, Moody were getting reps over him.
Yeah.
What do you think is going to happen if this continues from Wiggins? Do you think that Steve Kerr is going to move him out of the starting lineup?
Yeah.
Do you think that maybe he'll sub him out quickly? What do you think is going to happen?
I don't think he's going to get taken out of the starting lineup because that would show a clear decline to like the public too. I think what will start happening is you'll see Kuminga more in the finishing lineup. He's been playing pretty well lately. I mean, probably next week, if he continues to have a good week, we might start hitting on him if he becomes more consistent. But he's been playing pretty well, so you'd think maybe, and he's fulfilling a lot of the roles that Wiggins would normally fill, except for the 3-point shooting. So we'll see.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I don't want to believe that Wiggins has just somehow lost that touch.
Please.
I will say, just watching highlights from the Celtics finals, just the ability to have even you could call him a tertiary scorer if you want. Really, he would probably be best as a secondary scorer, but having this guy that can give you 18 points a game, but is hitting those tough step back, even a long two, hitting those hooks, getting those conversions in those post-ups against smaller players, that's really valuable for the Warriors. And it's especially valuable when the Warriors are not hitting shots. That brings us to the next thing we want to talk about. The Warriors are not having that good of a shooting stretch. Part of the Warriors' identity, obviously, is 3-point shots. A large portion of those come from Steph Curry. But you still like to see other players on the team converting, because the way the Warriors play, they need that. The Warriors can sometimes generate threes even against really physical, really pesky defenses like Cleveland last night, right? Cleveland was holding the Warriors, I believe, in I don't remember the most parts of the game. I think their half-court offensive rating was 85.
Yeah.
We saw the Warriors fight back.
Yeah, they
get it
really
to
did. They were down 3, I think, at one point, and I think
Right.
they actually took the lead for 1 second.
Yeah. And then what happened was, besides, Curry did not have an ultra efficient shooting night. I don't think people are worried about that.
No,
But
no one's worried.
the Warriors had opportunities from role players to hit 3-point shots, and they weren't. And what happens when you don't hit shots is that the opponent gets the rebound, they get in semi-transition, and they beat
They
you because
destroy
they're
them.
faster or younger than you.
Yeah.
Let's talk a bit about those shooting struggles.
Yeah.
What are you most worried about? What's been happening?
So I think the first thing that's kind of a little bit of a trend from last year in the playoffs is Klay Thompson's shooting percentage, and his shooting splits are just not as good as last year. I think he's in like the 30s in terms of percentage from the 3-point line specifically. Whereas, I mean, obviously this guy is known for his 3-point shot, and he's usually, I think he's like a 41 or 42% 3-point shooter. I think he actually might be like around a little bit higher than Steph, like 41.5, I think, is actually what his percentage is. And he's shooting around 35% this year.
Right.
Weirdly, like, I feel like this might be bad omen, but he's also shooting worse from the free throw line as well, which is interesting. He's shooting like 80%. He usually shoots a little bit above 85, and he's gotten close, like, to even higher than that. But I mean, he's just not shooting as well this year. I mean, maybe that's a little bit expected, just because Steph is back, and the period in which Klay was the best was whenever he was able to run the offense. And I think now in the second unit, he's having to deal with CP3, which is a little bit of a different look for him. I think you'd agree.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think the connection between him and CP has actually been really positive. Clay shoots
Yeah.
actually like really well whenever CP gets him the ball.
Okay.
Am I worried about Clay's like long-term outlook as a shooter? No, I don't think
Yeah.
he's going
No.
to end up as like a 35% three-point shooter, but we've seen more stretches like with this bad shooting from Clay in the past 2 years.
Yeah.
Um, people don't forget he tore his ACL and his, both legs.
Yeah.
What that does to you is, I mean, I guess non-scientifically, you have less lift.
Yeah.
If you watch any highlights from Clay pre-injury, watch him work with Clay and Steph actually in those death lineups during 2017, 2018. Clay is super hoppy, right? He'll pump fake, he'll drive to the basket, he'll slam it in. He'll get to his spots really quickly. Clay's not quite at that level anymore.
He's not as fast as he once was.
Right. He's 33. And I think that means that those parts of his game are going to be, I guess, more absent, which in theory reduces the quality of shots that he's going to get. But he plays with Steph Curry, so I think that honestly the Warriors don't need Clay to shoot the lights out every night if Wiggins wasn't doing so poorly. But when you have this combination of bad shooting,
yeah, absolutely,
it hurts. You just want anything from anyone, and Clay is someone that you would expect that from, seeing as he's like this maybe the second greatest 3-point shooter of all time.
And you'd expect him to be like the 3-point shooter that you look to in tough times.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Do you want to talk about CP3? CP3 hasn't had a good shooting start either. Maybe a bit better recently.
Yeah, I think he's really had a tough go. I think the big thing for me, like, this is probably the one I'm the least worried about. Obviously, shooting 17% from 3 right now. He's normally like a pretty good 3-point shooter, like not on Clay's level or Steph's level, but like 38%. And usually he's taking them off the dribble, which means he can probably be closer to 40%, honestly, if it was just catch and shoot. And right now, 41% effective field goal percentage from the field. Usually he's around like 51, 52%. And that's probably because of his 3-point shot specifically. The thing that I think this is affected by, and why I'm not as worried about it, even though it is the lowest percentage on the team almost pretty much, besides Wiggins, is he's thinking a lot. He's clearly every single play thinking about how to get the ball. I mean, he has so little turnovers, so many assists. He's trying to get everyone else involved. And I feel like when you don't know exactly when you're going to get your shots or when you're going to shoot, you second guess yourself. Sometimes you're like, oh, should I really be shooting here? And then the ball leaves your hands and you're like, oh, I left it a little short or something like that. And that thinking process and not it being a natural feel for him is really affecting his shooting. So honestly, I'm really happy with CP3. I feel like he's been doing a really good job. I'm not really concerned with his 3-point shot at all, because I feel like he's just trying to fit in, and that's what we wanted from him. If that's going to sacrifice a little bit of his 3-point shot for now, that's fine. I just want that to be in the second unit. Chris Paul, you can shoot. Don't be afraid. Like, you don't always have to pass to Saric to shoot. Like, it's okay. You can do
Yeah.
your own thing.
This is a career 37% 3-point shooter. You know,
Yeah,
when
better
he was in
recently. Yeah.
Phoenix, his first season in Phoenix, he shot 40% from 3
Yeah.
on 3.7 attempts per game. That's pretty good. And I think you're right about CP kind of second guessing himself. I've seen a few occasions where
Yeah.
CP might be coming on to that bottom corner off of a screen, and he'll actually have like enough time to get off a shot, but he won't take it. Maybe he'll dribble in,
No,
try
yeah.
and get a mid-range, or
Absolutely.
maybe he'll actually try and dish it off. And when I see that, I see like the opposite of what the Warriors want to happen. I think in that situation, you're a you're a serviceable, good 3-point shooter. Let it fly, right? The Warriors, I think, I don't think that this extremely poor shooting slump of the past few games is going to continue the entire year. I actually think the Warriors should shoot better this year than last year, assuming that Wiggins doesn't keep shooting 17%. Same with Chris Paul. Chris Paul and Wiggins are both shooting about 17% from 3. Only on 35 attempts per CP and 24 from Wiggins, but we need more. Dario Saric has looked pretty good,
Yeah,
stretch
really
fives,
good,
has been
honestly, for
shooting
what we
pretty well.
expected. Like, we expected him to just be a backup. He started, I think, one of the nights when
Yeah,
Draymond was out. So yeah, that's pretty
I
good.
believe that Dario Saric has the only 20 plus point game from the Warriors this season, except for Steph Curry. So,
Really, even Kuminga? Oh yeah, he had 19.
yep,
Oh
it
yeah,
was the game where where they played the Thunder. Dario Saric hit
yeah,
4 threes.
yeah, and got a couple. I think a little like easy offensive rebound type. Yeah, and I think
Right.
Kuminga scored 19 that game. He looked pretty good too.
Yeah, something that I want to see more as the second unit starts to play more and more minutes and look pretty solid, at least in terms of keeping the Warriors level, is I want to see CP and Dario Saric work their magic. I
Even
know that
more.
the Warriors, right? I know that the Warriors aren't going to become like a pure ball screening team, but
No.
we've seen them run not only the pistol actions, dribble handoffs that Chris Paul and Steph have been seen practicing, and also that Chris Paul has favored, especially in his time with Phoenix. But we've also seen CP and Dario Saric run quite a few nice little pick and pops. These aren't just pick and pops off of screens; they're also pick and pops off of like staggered screening actions, off of a lot of things that they would run for like Clay, for example.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
it's nice to see that from Dario and CP, and I want to see more of that just because if we're having like a flat game, well, I think, maybe those are the times to utilize the CP the connectedness that CP and Dario
Yeah,
Saric
and
have together.
it always gets a good shot. I think that's the big thing for me. Like CP when he does the pick and roll with Sarge, he always gets a good shot. Whether it's a dunk for Kuminga, a shot for him, he should shoot it more honestly, or a backwards pass. I feel like he's like this patented behind the back pass to Dario at the 3, and he takes it, and it's always pretty good. So I'm just glad he gets us good looks, and that's what I expected from him.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think the impact has been, extremely, extremely, extremely clear. Chris Paul is, but he had a stretch of pretty bad turnovers. I think he had like 2 or 3 in a row yesterday. But on the
Yeah,
season, 95th percentile in turnover percentage, 97th percentile in assist usage ratio and assist percentage. So Chris Paul is giving players the ball. He's unlocking parts of the second unit that Jordan Poole, that I don't know, Ty Jerome wasn't able to unlock last year. And it's enabling them to play a lot more fluidly. I think if I could talk briefly on the second unit, I think there are stretches where it looks like they struggle to score. And for me, that's mostly coming from the fact that Jonathan Kuminga and Moses Moody both don't have ultra developed shot creation portfolios. You've probably seen
yeah,
JK go to some of those like mid-range, kind of fadeaway jumpers in the past few games, but
yeah,
they're not like that reliable. And I don't think JK and Moody have really, mainly JK has really honed that part of his game yet.
yeah.
And I think that is making the second unit a bit flat. Would be nice to have a, bona fide point of attack, destructive handles type scorer in
Yeah.
that second unit. It's not
Yeah.
necessary if Chris Paul is gunning on all cylinders, but
Yeah.
I think
No.
that's something to look out for, is that like the second unit has been
Yes.
pretty stable. The second unit hasn't
Yeah,
necessarily
absolutely.
been like killing teams though, right? They've been
No,
good enough.
no. Yeah, and I think the big thing that we're seeing is the evolution of Jonathan Kuminga. I know you kinda like were like, "Oh, his step back thing." I think the key to me is this is like if you look at, like, if you want betting markets, if you're looking at players to go up, players whose free throw attempts increase in a season, usually there's a jump that comes with that, because when you're able to get easy baskets and get fouled, that means you're creating an advantage on a play. And like Jonathan Kuminga is starting to get to the free throw line more, and he's pretty bad from the free throw. Like he should be better than I think he's like in the 70s, like high 70s, but he should be like in the 80s or hopefully or the 90s. But if he gets better at free throw shooting and continues to get those free throws to fall, he can potentially be like that second unit star, in my opinion. I think that's what we're looking at in the latter 40 games. I think the first 40
Yeah.
games really can build confidence for him.
Yeah, I think that's possible. I think we saw a stretch from that, like that from Wiggins yesterday, where he got a string of like 2 or 3 fouls in a row.
Being
I don't know if
Kuminga.
it was like consecutively. Yeah, sorry. JK did.
Yeah.
And it slowed down the Cavs' momentum. It brought back the Warriors into the game. Obviously, they still lost, but good to see Kuminga being aggressive. This year, he's taking a higher percentage of his field goals from 10 to 16%. Obviously, small sample size, but in his first 2 seasons, he didn't take that many shots from, 10 to 16 feet. Even from 3 to 10 feet, just in general, he wasn't taking that many of those shots you're talking about. This year, we've seen an uptick in that, especially in that, 3 to 10 range. Last year, he was taking 28% of his field goals from that. This year, it's up to 35. So hopefully we see that continue, because we need the aggressiveness and we need the size, especially
Absolutely.
if Wiggins is not going to produce, which hopefully doesn't continue. One other guy that I wanted to ask you about before we go to the next 5, Trace Jackson Davis. He got some good minutes against Denver. He's played a bit more in past games. Do
Yeah.
you think it's safe to say that TJD is definitely like going to be in this Warriors rotation and is maybe one of the steals of the draft?
I mean, he's one of the last picks in the draft, so if you play, you're a
57.
steal in my book. Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah, so he's a steal, yeah. But like I feel like for him it's more of like he's not really in the rotation, but he's like in the rotation in that like I know someone's gonna go down and so he'll play. So
Right.
he's just a smart basketball player. He's like the Anthony Lamb of this year, except he can't shoot threes. So that's pretty much what he is.
Yeah, I mean, I think the best part of having TJD is that he clearly looks like he knows what he's doing. He's working well with CP on those roles. He is he's either getting fouled or making pretty tough finishes, especially as a roller. And I think that's really valuable to have, because it lessens the amount of time that Looney has to play. We saw TJD actually get a few like matchups against Denver and perform pretty well. Obviously, the Warriors still lost, but TJD's been looking good. So, hats off to the Warriors. Hats off to Dunleavy for potentially one of the steals of the draft.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to end, as we always do, by talking about the next 5. So the Warriors started off this year on pretty rough. I mean, they ended up 6-2. So I wouldn't call it rough, but 6-3. But a pretty difficult road stretch. Their next 5 games are all at home. As I talked about earlier, those next 5 games will be Minnesota, OKC, and then Houston. Notably, there's no back-to-backs. They get a day of rest between each one of these games.
Yeah, I think they get 2 between one of them too. Yeah.
Based on that, how do you project the Warriors to do? They're playing, as I said at the top, as we both talked about, athletic, long teams. Minnesota is on fire right now.
Yeah.
What are you thinking here?
Thinking like 3-2. That's what I'm feeling. I feel like we'll lose one to Minnesota, lose one to the Thunder. I think the Thunder will be gunning for us because we beat them in that in-season tournament game, and we really have a problem with Chet, and I think Shea's going to come out. And then Timberwolves are just tough, but I think we'll be able to steal one just because we're at home. I mean, I think our home crowd is going to give us a lot of juice. The Rockets, I think we are a good matchup for the Rockets in terms of they don't really have a good defender for Steph Curry besides Dylan Brooks, and I think we can get him off of Curry pretty reliably. So,
yeah, I would agree with that. I honestly might go 2-3. If the Warriors lose tonight to Minnesota, I would probably go 2-3. I'm really concerned in terms of like a playoffs outlook against teams like Minnesota. I don't want to be hyperbolic. I don't want to overreact to the first 10 games.
yeah,
But
no need.
as I've said, the T-Wolves have the perfect, not the perfect, but a very good roster construction here. We've talked in the past about how Naz Reid has been like this warrior stopper. He's this unique combination of size, of length,
Can shoot the three.
of 3-point, of 3-point ability. This season he's shooting, 43%?
Yeah, he's not going to shoot 43, but yeah.
Obviously not. But that Jaden McDaniels, one of my predictions for Defensive Player of the Year this year, who's doing really well. Anthony Edwards, who sometimes makes questionable decisions, but is really aggressive on ball, and when he turns it on, is extremely useful and extremely annoying. Kyle Anderson, all of these guys that are really tough and annoying for the Warriors to deal with. And to me, if the Warriors drop tonight, which, they might, it's a back-to-back. They just played another team that's pretty similar. We might be looking at like 2-3. I don't want to say 1-4. I think the Warriors are better than that. I don't think the shooting slumps will continue. But yeah, I think maybe let's finish on just season outlook here. It's been 10 games.
1/8 of the way.
1/8 of the way. We still need more games, obviously. But based on this, would you revise where you have the Warriors, this and the rest of the West, in terms of like seeding?
The rest of the West, I think I would have to revise just because I've had the Mavs really low and I have to put them up a little more. I think the Grizzlies are in dire straits. I think they might not make the play-in. Just because the West is so competitive. And I think the key thing about this season that I'm learning is that all the teams in the West are good. Like, there's not really a give me game, so it's going to be tough for a team to go on like a 10-0 run or like a 12-0 run. The only team that can do that is Denver. And I don't even know if Denver can do it. So it's going to be tough. That's what this season told me. It's going to be tough in the West. It's going to be easy in the East.
Yeah, currently, I think when you just look down the entire West standings, Denver, Dallas, Minnesota, Houston, OKC, Sacramento, LA, Phoenix, New Orleans. The Clippers are down at 12 right now, but that probably won't stay. We'll see. All of those teams are super annoying, right? So there's like 12, 13 teams in the West that are not free wins by any means any given night. Obviously, there will be sprinkles of like the Pistons or the teams that the Warriors have a great shot against and are definitely better than, or at least it appears that way. But doesn't seem like it's going to be an easy year for the Warriors at all.
No, yeah.
That'll do it for episode 70 of Warriors Weekly. We'll be back later to talk about the NBA and I guess the in-season tournament.
Yeah.